Welcome to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, where we discuss all things political, bringing you the top stories locally, nationally, and from around the world. I'm Ruben Abati, and This Day Live begins now. I'd like to welcome today's panelists, Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Polytech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, and Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough. Welcome to This Day Live, another edition. Well, Prof and Yemi, let's begin in Nigeria, where the police command arrested Gracious David West, an alleged serial killer in PORT-HARCOURT, capital of Rivers State. In a series of tweets on Thursday, the police said the suspect was arrested while on his way to Uyo from PORT-HARCOURT. About 8 young women have been murdered in different hotels in the state in the past 2 months. The bodies of these ladies were said to have been found in similar conditions, strangled and with a white piece of cloth tied around their necks. Investigation is on with a view to ascertaining his motives and possible accomplices. The Commissioner of Police, Rivers State, Commissioner of Police Mustafa Dandaura will be briefing the media on this today. Now, Yemi, all of a sudden, we seem to have moved from, from banditry, kidnapping, now to serial killing. We have a Jack the Ripper on the loose, as it were, so to speak. But is it good news that the police have been able to at least arrest, the main culprit, as alleged, with the aid of CCTV? Although we understand that there are others who are still, on the run, and that, this is not restricted to PORT-HARCOURT. We also understand that in some other parts of the South, particularly Owerri, there have also been reported cases. What's your take on this?
I mean, it's definitely a positive step that the police have arrested someone. But I think for me, what was a bit concerning was the process that got us there and how long it took. I mean, first of all, the initial report from the police was that they were prostitutes. And the question is, and so what? What if they were prostitutes? They're being murdered. I mean, the choice of livelihood or whatever they choose to do does not give them a license to be killed. That's number one. Number two, for the police to also have come out and said they had given directives that hotels needed to have CCTV to help out, that there needed to be a process of registration when people check into hotels, that hotels were clearly violating. And in the reporting, it was more than the names of the ladies were in the media, but the names of the hotels were being kept secret. So I think for me, there were some concerns around how the police were handling it. And it took quite, I think it was on Wednesday that the Rotary Club in PORT-HARCOURT and a few, I think 20 other organizations organized a protest to the CP's office and says, you must do something. Now, after arresting this gentleman, there were some pictures that came out with him drinking water, eating rice. So the sort of circumstances of his confession.
You have an objection to his being fed?
Let me put that back. I don't have an objection to him being fed. I have an objection to that being made public. You can feed him, but I don't see why we need to see pictures of it and him seemed. I mean, it just seemed. The concern was that it seemed very staged. Let me put it out there. That it seemed very staged. You have someone who is confessing, standing, obviously not under any sort of duress or anything of the matter, confesses, then is sitting down. I think there was a picture of him with the CP. So it all seemed a bit too chummy, if I want to use that word. But we look forward to seeing what the police do say as they find others, and then also ensuring that the murders stop, more importantly.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely correct about the point on profiling. Yeah. Of the affected ladies who were already labeled prostitutes. We have had other accounts of ladies who escaped, who took a taxi cab, and in the course of the journey, there was an attempt to strangle them, and they escaped, and they've been telling their stories. Yeah. So even if they were prostitutes, I mean, is it an offense? In the real sense to is that an excuse for murder?
And also society's response as well, which I think beyond the police and the profiling, also the way society has responded, almost seeming that not to care as much because they were prostitutes, and that definitely needing to be addressed and engaged.
Quite correct. But Prof, what do you think?
I think that the arrest by the police is really commendable because Nigeria has two main issues to contend with. The first one is the general societal problem. If it is not kidnapping today, tomorrow it is armed banditry. By the time efforts are made to deal with armed banditry, now we are shifting to kidnapping.
Well,
From
Prof,
kidnapping,
if you could just hold on for a second. I think we have the video of the alleged serial killer confessing there on the screen.
Pay her. So after that, we left the club to the hotel.
What is the name of the hotel? Can you remember the name of the hotel?
Back the hotel. It's at Rumokoro, that's Aso-Rock.
Okay, Aso-Rock. Rumokoro.
No, Rupoko side.
Rupoko, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so what happened when you go
So
there?
after that, we went to the hotel.
Yes.
I paid for the place. So they took her to the hall. So after they took her, I said, okay, let me look for you to arrange for food that she will eat myself. So they prepared food and we ate. So after that, we slept till when the day broke by around that 5:30. Yes, 5:30 to rest till 4 or 5:30. So I brought out a knife. She didn't actually know that there was a knife there. So I brought out a knife. That threatened her, let her don't shout. Then she shouted, I will use the knife on her. So without fear, she wouldn't shout. And by then the television, the volume was
Loud.
Yes, loud. So she kept quiet, and after that, I used the wrapper to tie her heads from the back, then tie her legs.
Which rapper?
Pillowcase.
Well, I mean, from every angle, quite a terrible tale, But, Prof, you were commenting
Yes,
on
you
this
see,
before.
a look at the video tells you that criminals in Nigeria have become more hardened than ever before. We used to have people taking hard drugs, all those things all along. Criminals in Nigeria in the early 70s, mid-80s, we know they were criminals. But the modern day criminals in Nigeria, more than ever before, have become so hardened to the extent that heartlessness has become the hallmark. So life doesn't mean anything to them, first point. And this is why I think that the efforts made by the policemen in arresting this type of serial killer is quite commendable, And it appears that since February 23rd, since the tenure of the president can be said to have begun, it appears to me that there is a new seriousness of purpose in trying to deal with crimes in the society. This is quite commendable. Now, the second way of looking at the matter is that it's not just PORT-HARCOURT, as you rightly pointed out. We have all these problems all over the country. Now, while we commend the Commissioner of Police, Dandaura, for this particular feat, I think all the other commissioners of police in the areas should be challenged, should actually be encouraged to fish out, you see, the criminals in the society. Because the safety of even foreigners in Nigeria should be a top priority, as Nigeria's international image is necessarily at stake. By the time you have Nigerians bastardizing, killing, maiming Nigerians. If they can do that one to a Nigerian, why will a foreigner not also be? So I think that there is the need for us to commend the efforts of the Commissioner of Police there. And as Yemi rightly pointed out earlier, there is the need to wait for the briefing that the Commissioner of Police intends to tell us whether there will be new discoveries, whether there will be lessons to take home from that. But for now, let's say it's so far so good.
Well, but, I mean, one other thing we can say is that, the full wrath of the law, must be faced by the persons who have been accused and whose guilt, can be established in the long run. And beyond that, this gentleman who has been arrested and whoever his accomplices may be, once they've been taken in by the police, they should not disappear from police custody, as is, common in this part. But Yemi...
But you see, before Yemi takes over, you see, we have always been told about arrests. At times, we have been told that they were taken to court. You are talking about the rule of law. Yes, of course. The situation depends on who is backing, whether the serial killer has any backer in the society, all those things.
Of course, but that's the issue.
So you see, serial killing appears to me to be a business.
But it is, though. I mean,
right? So it's
I don't. But what I was going to say,
I think the police should leave every option open in their investigation.
Exactly.
They should not jump to any conclusions. First, they jump to the conclusion that the ladies involved were prostitutes.
Exactly.
We have seen that that is not quite true.
Yeah.
Let them not also jump to the conclusion that this is a case of cultism. There could be, other parts for, likely investigation that could produce a different kind of, information. But Yemi, we have had women and men protesting on the streets of Port-HARCOURT. Should the protests be limited to Port-HARCOURT? Shouldn't people also in other parts of Nigeria say, look, we don't want serial killers in this environment? After all, this was how terrorism started. This was how banditry, kidnapping all started. We all waited until, the thing became a national menace.
It's a challenge, but I think as just human psychology, it takes a bit to empathize with things that are not haven't happened, if I want to use that word, or that in your environment, or that are far away. But I just wanted to take on Prof on the issue around the new seriousness of the police, and I'm not quite sure I agree. I think, for example, my organization, as I said a few weeks ago, we're tracking missing people, and one of the things that the police will say is that, oh, we've rescued or we found. And family members will consistently come back and say, you didn't do anything. We had to pay ransom. We had to pay ransom. So I think, and we've seen that increase in people challenging the police, wanting to take claim for the fact that they're doing work, with people saying, no, you did nothing, and we had to pay a ransom. But as Dr. Abatia said, we'll see how they handle this. And I'm sure the women in Port-HARCOURT and other organizations will be paying close attention. And also, I mean, as with Nigeria, international media also plays quite a big part in when people start to take things seriously. And the case of the serial killer in Port-HARCOURT has gotten quite a bit of international coverage as well.
Well, I won't disagree with you. The only thing is just that various press reports have it that, look, the policemen have done this, have done that. But if from an empirical perspective, your organization, enough is enough. And that's why you exist. You now come with the real situational reality. Then we will share your viewpoint on that. But from what they have given us, by even arresting this type of individual...
Did you see him? He had his sling bag across his shoulder. They had him standing. Even the way the police investigate and put people in front of camera is quite worrisome.
But the guy is said to be just about 26 years old, and that even makes it really tragic.
Quite.
What is happening with the youth population in Nigeria. But we'll take a short break now. When we return, the conversation will continue. Stay tuned. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me in the studio are Professor Bola Akinterewa, Director General, BOLITAG Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, and Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough. Now, still in Nigeria, let's take another topic. I mean, before we went on break, we were talking about serial killing. But something else of great interest in Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari has constituted an 8-member Economic Advisory Council. This comes as a replacement for the Economic Management Team, which was supervised by the Vice President. The Advisory Council will be chaired by including fiscal analysis, economic growth, and a range of internal and global economic issues, working with the relevant cabinet members and heads of monetary and fiscal agencies. Meanwhile, the Central Bank of Nigeria has announced that the full implementation of the cashless policy nationwide will become effective from March 31, 2020. The full implementation is to further promote a cashless economy and enhance the collection of applicable government revenues. A processing fee of 3% for withdrawals and 2% for lodgements above 500,000 naira for individual accounts will apply. For corporate accounts, the charge is 5% for withdrawals and 3% for lodgements above 3 million naira. Now, two economic issues there. The announcement of an Economic Advisory Council. And this Advisory Council, of course, if you look at the names of the persons there, these are people, who are distinguished in their own right. They are technocrats with the know-how. We had Bismarck Rewane on the morning show. He described them as economics and economic thinkers. And he was trying to say, it's not enough to be an economist. You must also be an economic thinker. In other words, he endorsed, that advisory council.
You didn't expect him to?
Yeah?
I was just teasing that.
Well, he's himself a member of that advisory council, although he didn't go further. He didn't want to preempt the work of the council. But, Prof, what do you think? Some people have tried to politicize this to say that it amounts to some form of demotion for the vice president. But, of course, the vice president has, since that announcement of the advisory council, shown that, his position, his role, constitutional role as the head of the National Economic Council is not diminished in any way. And there was a meeting of the National Economic Council, with all the governors as members, and that council is chaired by the vice president. But what do you think beyond the conspiracy theories?
First point, Professor Osinbajo is on record to be very, very faithful and very, very defensive of whatever the Buhari administration has been doing right from 2015. And that is quite good. He behaved not professorially, but as a diplomatist, all right, who does not want to be seen, all right, in the public as contravening or going against his boss.
Yeah,
second point.
First, Prof, I wanted you to focus on the Economic Advisory Council.
I'm coming.
He's laying the foundation.
I'm coming. Yes. You see, the issue is that, as you pointed out, the council consists of very competent professionals. There's no disputing that fact. And when you have a council that is made up of people who are economists, and there's no way you can be an economist and not being an economic thinker.
No, it's not automatic.
I'm coming. Look, we can argue this. Who is an economist? An economist is not just anyone who has studied economy in the university. You must have been brought up through some processes of thinking, either as an econometrician, all right, depending on the area you want to specialize on. But I'm not disputing the fact either that having been an economist, you cannot upgrade yourself and become a serious thinker. It's just like when you have all these medical practitioners, they are doctors. But when they reach a certain level, they become again Mr. to show the level of attainment. So we can talk about economic, thinkers. But I do not see the problem from competence only. When we have charges, 2% on this, 3% on that, it doesn't matter at all. In the public service, the regulation at a point in time said, if you are withdrawing at least 1 million and above.
Prof, let's take the subjects one by one. the Economic Advisory Council.
Yes.
What should they do? We seem to agree that it's a good team. I mean, a team that has Charles Soludo, Bismarck Rewane, Doyin Salami, the deputy chairman. He's a banker, he's an economist, he's a lawyer, you know, and an economist. You have Professor Odeojowu,
yes,
who also has, you know, an excellent profile.
The functions have been well articulated. They are there. They are to research. On the basis of their research, they are to advise. They are supposed to take all the critical issues involved. I've taken all that for granted. I am saying that in the public service, where a permanent secretary is required to seek the approval of the minister above 1 million, what they do, they break the amount into two. It will never reach 1 million.
Oh, you're talking about in terms of deposits.
Precisely, the same thing there. In all those things, the politics there. Please, theoretically, the policies as put, they are good. 3% for lodgements above 3 million naira. The issue is that you will never deposit 3 million.
You deposit what, 2.9?
You just deposit 2.9, and then you have defeated all that. So what are you going to advise on that? You see, all our policies have always been adopted in such a way that there are lapses and rooms, you know, to frustrate the same policy.
Well, yeah, so let me have your take on the Economic Advisory Council.
I think it'll be interesting to see how they work with the National Economic Council. I think the Vice President acts in a sort of, I don't know if I want to call it mediator for the National Economic Council, making sure everybody's on the same page, we all understand where we're going as it affects ministries and governors. Now, you have this team that's completely outside of government, in a sense, and then they're reporting directly to the president. How that works with, how they interface with the National Economic Council reporting to the Vice President, or not reporting, but briefing the Vice President, how that relates with what the Vice President does with the President. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage the dynamics. I think the good thing about it is that, as you've said, quite a few people on it are not strangers. Professor Salami, who chairs it, was part of the transition committee.
Yes.
Mr. Rewani was part of the minimum wage. He was
chair of the committee on the new national minimum wage.
So I think they're not new to the dynamics.
And then Professor Soludo, he's been chief economic advisor and he's been governor of the Central Bank.
And I think I would also hazard a guess that the Vice President has decent relationships with the gentleman involved, and I'm not sure about the lady. So it'll be interesting to see how they work together.
She's also an economist. Dr.
I'm not saying she's not. I'm talking about relationships, sort of personal relationship. So with, for example, Dr. Salami being part of the transition committee, they've known each other through that process. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Now, also the other side of it is both Mr. Rewan and I would say Dr. Salami have been quite critical about the economic policies of the Buhari administrations as outsiders. Well, so, and it'll be interesting to see how that then plays out, as they are now given the task of advising. So if you continue to advise and your advice is not taken, as we've seen, it'll be interesting to see the dynamics of how they react and how they manage that.
From a structural perspective, you have the advisory council, you have the Osinbajo-led Economic Council.
Which is constitutional.
I'm not disputing that.
No, just...
You see, my problem now is that the advisory council is reporting directly to who?
To the president.
Good. Now, the economic council, constitutionally established, is reporting to who?
To the president.
As well.
Good. Now, we now have two instruments, right, of advice. The Osinbajo group, the advisory group, as we are talking about how they relate, are they going to relate on parallel lines?
No, I'm just so you're clear about what I'm saying. I'm not talking about how they relate relative to the president. I'm talking about how they relate relative to themselves.
Precisely, I'm coming to that.
Okay.
You see, I'm looking at a future problematic where, for instance, an advice emanating from the level of the Economic Council conflicts with the advice from the Advisory Council All right.
Well, I don't think it should be too difficult. I mean, the
That's why I focused
Economic
on
Council
relationships,
is basically almost like a political group. They are not experts, you know, and that's why that synergy that she's talking about is important. You know, it's to get feedback from the states, to define priorities, and the buck stops at the president's desk. The president, of course, is the chief economic manager of the country. That's one of his major jobs. Okay, so that synergy should be at the level of the president, and I don't think that that should be difficult.
Okay, well, let me draw you to an empirical experience. I always look at history before looking forward and making my point. In this same country, Federal Republic of Nigeria, we used to have the Presidential Advisory Council on Foreign Relations.
It's still there, I believe. I hope. It's there.
I won't make any comment on that. Emeka Anyaku
I've not heard
was
that it's been
president.
dissolved.
He's implying it's not functional.
Now, many a times, the position of the Presidential Advisory Council on Foreign Relations was different from the position the Ministry of Foreign Affairs takes. And at the end of the day, it appeared that they look at it from perspective of rivalry. And whereas, you know, Emeka Anyaku himself, his brain, his blood is fully of, you know, diplomatic corpuscles. He's always thinking, looking forward, because of his very wide experience. But it wasn't looked like that. It wasn't taken like that at the level of the foreign ministry. So there was always a problem. So we are now having an advisory economic council too, okay, now, that will be working either pari passu with the economic council. So
Prof, we need to look at. And I think the point you are making is that you can't just put these experts together and not listen to them. Then the purpose of setting up the Economic Advisory Council will have been defeated in that regard. We'll take a short break now, and then when we come back, we'll continue with the conversation. Welcome back to This Day Live here on the Arise News channel. Still with me in the studio, we have Professor Bola Akintenrua, Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, and Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director. Enough is enough. Now, Yemi and Prof, I had wanted you to comment on the cashless policy by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, it's not as if it's a new policy. It's been in place, but it was suspended in 2017. And now it's been reintroduced in 6 states and the FCT. These 6 states include Lagos, Rivers, Kano, Ogun, Abia, Anambra, and then I think the FCT. And the information is that it will become nationwide on March 31st, the year 2020. And the whole idea is to encourage a cashless, you know, regime within the country. Already, according to the CBN, a lot has been achieved in terms of financial inclusion, and it is hoped that, you know, if you insist on cashlessness, you will further, you know, improve on a digital banking approach. Prof, what do you think? I've had some people saying nobody can take 1 kobo from their money, otherwise they will no longer take money to the banks.
Well, I wouldn't blame them. But March 31st, 2020 may not be a good realistic date. The women in Idumata market, the typical Igbo businessmen, in fact, the indigenous way of banking, where people keep their money under their pillow and do not even go to banks. I don't know the extent to which a cashless, you know, banking policy will apply to them. Are they educated enough? They are not currently using all these ATM cards. They are not.
On the contrary, Prof, a lot of Nigerians use ATM cards. A lot of Nigerians use POS. And I can tell you, you know, someone had reported that even beggars in Lagos these days carry POS. Just in case you say you don't have cash, they will bring out the POS. They will say we collect with POS
They
too.
do business with that. Look, you are talking about the metropolis. Look, when you go to the rural areas, most of the people do not have access to this ATM. They are not sufficiently educated on that. Government will need to address that. The second point is that, as of today, the discrepancies, the fraudulent activities that have come to characterize all this use of POS will need to be addressed. If by March 31st, 2020, we are supposed to be going totally.
Well, the CBN's objective, of course, in the long run, is not to discourage deposits. That's not the objective. I'm sure that they will work out all of this quickly.
Do you remember why they were suspended in 2017? Because I've been trying to think and I don't remember why. I think for me...
Well, I mean, it wasn't suspended fully. What they did was to suspend, processing fees on withdrawals. Right, okay. Yeah, that was what they did.
They started with some states.
Yes,
by
with
that
some
time,
pilot states.
Thinking that it will spread over.
When Lamido Sanusi started, I think by the time it was suspended, I thought we had made significant progress. So I think the stopping and starting also raises questions around our seriousness of the matter, number one. Number two, if you take the airport, for example, in Lagos, when you park, if you pay with your ATM card or use their POS, you get charged because they pass on the charges to you as the client. But if you pay cash, you don't get charged. So if government agency is doing that, I'm not quite sure how that supports their agenda for a cashless society. And you just use that as an example.
Well, I'm sure we'll get there with time, Things start slowly in Nigeria.
No, what I'm trying to say is that it wasn't that way before. That way before, if I was paying with my card or paying cash, it was the same amount of money. So now you're passing on into me. So I'm saying that if the government is also serious about it, then they need to look internally around how they themselves as an institution process money rather than how Nigerians also receive and process money. So if a government institution puts a penalty on using a POS, that does not support what they're trying to prove.
I get your point. Yeah. Well, let's take a look at another subject. The Yoruba group, Afenifere, and others have criticized President Muhammadu Buhari's recent decision to replace Vice President Yemi Osinbajo-led economic management team with an economic advisory council that will be reporting directly to him. President Buhari has taken full possession of his government, it is alleged, unlike during his first term when he delegated powers to his vice to make decisions and approve contracts, annual reports, annual accounts, and power to make regulations, among other key functions. This action by President Buhari led to speculations by the media of a possible misunderstanding between him and the vice president. Meanwhile, Vice President Osinbajo revealed that there are people he describes as saboteurs working against the administration of President Buhari. He said the president inherited a debased economy from the immediate past administration in 2015. This, he said, has prevented some of the steps taken by the president to manifest on the well-being of poor Nigerians. The vice president stated this at a church service in Ekiti State. He said the present state of the nation requires everyone to be on board and to work hard. Osinbajo debunked claims in some quarters that President Buhari does not know how to govern. He said the reason Nigerians cannot feel the president's effort is because saboteurs were working against the administration. Well, Yemi, what do you think? I mean, I've tried to dismiss this, as just conspiracy theory. Section 148, gives the president powers, to delegate, functions, assignments as he deems fit. And if you look at our constitution, the president of Nigeria is like a constitutional monarch, and there is only one president, it's not unusual for the president to say, I want to take charge of the economy myself. This is how I want to, go forward, except we do something about the constitution and specify certain things to say the VP must do this, the deputy governor must do this. I think to try to create some kind of conflict between the vice president and the president is mischievous, in my view. Prof, you have been in the system.
You see, look, quoting the Constitution is good.
Even Section 5 of the Constitution gives the president enormous powers.
You are correct to the extent that the Constitution defines what a vice president can do. If the president does not allocate any function, any responsibility, the vice president will be there sleeping, doing nothing.
He can sit in his office and read newspapers for 8 years.
But you see,
it's in order. It's fine.
But the problem is not that. When people complain, the Constitution says X, Y, Z. Implementation is Y, X, and differently. Who does not know quite well that the rules are that, look, apply the principles of federal character? Who does not know quite well that the president can appoint whoever he wants to appoint? Like he did say, he will appoint the people he knows. Now, people now say you cannot be preaching the sermon, of godliness, the sermon of federal character, the sermon of, whatever, and be doing the contrary. So this is the issue. If the Afenifere people are now drawing his attention to some anomalies, fine. It doesn't, well, I would say it doesn't mean that the president does not have the constitutional right to do whatever he wants. But whatever he wants to do, please, should reflect fairness, justice, right? Not okay, for instance, now, there is conflict between the right to appoint and the interest of the general public. When Mr. President is accused of nepotism, for instance, we all admit that he has the right to appoint whoever he wants to. But by the time people are now saying, look, the people you are appointing, they are from one section of the country. How do you explain that one? So this is the issue. In a country where we are preaching diversity, in a country where we are saying, look, let there be national unity. Why are you preaching national unity, gospel of national unity, and at the end of the day you are doing the contrary?
Well, Yemi, quickly, do you share the view that there is a conspiracy against Vice President Osinbajo, and that what we have seen with the emergence of this economic advisory council is an attempt to whittle down the influence and powers of his office? Because some people have also said some departments that were under his control previously have now been taken to a new ministry, and some of his staff have been asked to move out of the villa, or this is also a case of, misperception.
I mean, one of the things we've said consistently about this administration is that communication is not their strong suit, and they've consistently failed at it. So when and nature abhors a vacuum. So when there's a vacuum of context, of knowledge, people add 2 + 2 and get 22, number one. Number two, but I think I will disagree with the vice president when he says that people saying that the president doesn't know how to administer is the work of saboteurs. I don't think so. I think it's the work of Mr. President himself. Because, I mean, we've said this over and over again. Major issues happen in the country. Mr. President doesn't speak. He doesn't communicate with his citizens. He's not seen. He's not heard. So it's very easy for those around him and those working for him to fill in those gaps. And those gaps can then be perceived in very different ways. Nothing stops the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria from addressing the country and talking about his new economic thrust, that we realize that we might be heading towards a recession. This is a challenge. This is a challenge. Therefore, in consultation with blah, 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 have now set up an economic advisory council. He's been told to do that since 2015. When you address the issues head on, then it makes it much easier for people to see where you're going. But that has not been his style, and he continues to abdicate that role. So when people then fill in the gaps for him, it's kind of hard to figure out which one is false and which one is true.
Well, yes, Prof, quickly. We'll have to go on break. Shortly.
I subscribe to the conspiratorial theory. Reason one, if ministries, departments under him had not been taken elsewhere, secondly, if he's wanted, nothing prevents his still being asked to share it, to be part of the same advisory council.
Well, Prof,
Three,
I think you are correct,
okay.
but we have to take a short break now, another commercial break, and then when we return, we'll take on another subject. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to Thisdaylive, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. I still have with me in the studio Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, BUHARI'S Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, and Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in our office in North. Now, Prof, before we went on break, you were making certain comments about what appears to be a conspiracy around the office of the Vice President, as alleged.
I was on the second point that if, for instance, some departments that were under his supervised authority had not been moved elsewhere, and more importantly, based on media reports, that most of the things he decided upon, actions he took when he was acting president, now had been reversed. So when we are talking about conspiracy against him, these are the manifestations. So I subscribe to the school of thought that really the system, a conspiratorial, systemic, an attitudinal disposition towards his person is in place. I subscribe to that.
Well, we just hope that we won't have on our hands a divided presidency. Because if you have a divided presidency, that could have implications long-term for the effectiveness of the entire government itself. And I think that, President Buhari himself should personally take note of all these concerns that have been expressed and ensure that those who are alleging that, the knives, the cabals are out for...
Especially that Osinbajo, as I was making my point earlier, he has been loyally, faithfully defending, even at the risk of his own life, Muhammad Buhari.
And name,
Yes,
not just
your
life,
point
but
is
his,
noted.
but his name as well.
Let's talk about the global climate crisis. Masses of children did not go to school on Friday, so they could join the global strike against climate change that activists hope will mark a turning point in persuading leaders to act against environmental disaster. Over 4 million people filled city streets around the world in what was expected to be the biggest ever protest against the threat posed to the planet by rising temperatures. Youngsters and adults chanted slogans and waved placards in demonstrations that started in Asia and the Pacific, spread across Africa, Europe, and Latin America before culminating in the United States, where activists say politicians must listen. Now, incidentally, tomorrow is a special day devoted to a discussion of the climate crisis by the United Nations as part of the United Nations General Assembly for this year. But I think one person that should be commended in these demonstrations on September 20 is Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old Swedish girl who has been leading the Fridays for Future movement and has been able to mobilize, young people from around the world. And I keep campaigning for her that she deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for this year on account of her commitment and the leadership, the maturity that she has shown, an area in which many political leaders are found wanting. But Yemi, what do you think?
Indeed, and I think for me the beauty of it is that this, we have the Greenpeaces of the world who've done quite a bit in terms of the environment, but that the voices of young people has given a sort of new energy, new tactics, and culminating on Friday, the whole public school system in New York being shut down.
And adults join the children too.
To allow them to do that. But and that's the truth. The real point, and if you parallel it to politics, we have the most to lose. You guys are not paying enough attention. You guys are not listening. You guys are not prioritizing what is important to us, because when you're gone, we'll live on this planet and it's this bad. And not even the future, but even the present. I listen to a Mexican young man talk about, he's been protesting since he was 7, talk about, look, that it's even now we can see it. So it's not just about the future. There's present danger now. Water levels are rising, people are losing their homes, they're losing their livelihoods, and we can't just keep quiet. And for me, that's the beauty of it. I'll stop shy of saying a Nobel Peace Prize this year, but definitely should be commended for the work that she's done.
She's a global icon.
I'm not saying she's
not. And she deserves to be celebrated.
We just disagree on
Prof,
that.
what do you think? President Trump will be at the UN tomorrow, but he will not be attending the program on climate change. He will be attending something else on religious freedom.
Why would you expect him to attend?
As in, seriously?
why would you expect a Donald Trump to attempt? The main problem, the main challenge, you know, is that the United States under Donald Trump has a major problem. Donald Trump doesn't believe that there is anything like a climate change, that there is global warming. His own understanding is that global warming was couched as a strategy meant to make American companies non-competitive, that it was done especially to defend, to promote the Chinese, under the pretext that probably the Chinese are said to account for 28% of pollution, you know, and Americans probably 20, 21, 22. Now, Donald Trump doesn't believe that there is any challenge, that there is any problem like global warming. Consequently, since he doesn't believe, that's why he
tells him to listen to the scientists, to follow the science.
Exactly.
Because the scientists under the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they've shown that we have less than 10 years to do something about, you know, the climate crisis we face, or the world will be in greater jeopardy.
And it's also interesting that even in developing countries that contribute less to the sort of global emissions and all the other parameters, it's not priority because we have greater issues of poverty and that people are fighting. So the dynamics of it as well, that it's also driven largely by the West.
I think we were together in Copenhagen when the special summit on this climate change was held there. You know, African leaders, African governments were asked to contribute a certain percentage, and they were now saying, look, we are not responsible for all this something.
Exactly.
You should pay X, Y, Z amount. Now, other countries have said, look, they can do this as much. But later, the Americans opted out of it entirely, which now gave room for the Chinese to now assume a full leadership control over climate matters in international relations. So this is the issue. So if we have a new campaigner saying everybody should listen, we have been told that it takes two to tango. You cannot have two main frontliners, the Americans on the one side and all others. They are not operating at the same framework level. So Americans may go to the, you know, the US president can go to the UN tomorrow. It's expected. Not going to the climate change department, that will be consistent with his policy, and that's the issue.
And it's trying to pull out of the Paris Agreement.
Well, clearly, of course. I mean,
no, it has already. The climate change something, yes, the Americans withdrew.
They withdrew from the Paris climate change accord.
They withdrew already.
Yes, it was President Trump that
there we go.
unilaterally, you know, that did that. But of course, what is important is that the threat to our planet is very real. If you look at the Amazon fires, you know,
Precisely.
the fires in the Amazon caused a lot of concern at the recent G7 summit, to the extent that, you know, that zone of the world alone, you know, accounts for the oxygen, about 20%, 60% of the oxygen that we breathe.
Their scientific recommendation findings says that in about by 2070, that's the time they will expect to have this quantum amount of global warming under ocean. But now, 2070. That's 50 years to come. They are already now having global warming on the ocean.
But he just
Solomon Islands, Vanuatu.
The point I'm trying to make there now is that rather than wait until 2070,
10 years is what we have.
No, 2070.
No, 10 years.
The
is what was
international,
signed.
the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change
Says we have
says, in
10
fact,
years.
within 10 years,
Yeah.
the matter will be worse. And we've already seen the
Is
evidence
that
of
not
this.
on the sinking of...
In India, in
Yeah.
Vanuatu, in Solomon Islands, in Brazil, and elsewhere.
Well,
Prof, thank you very much. Yemi, thank you very much. That's all we'll be able to do today. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati. From my entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching.